In the quiet hill town of Silverpine, where the wind carried the scent of pine and whispers of old secrets, there lived a girl named Mira Elwood. She was the daughter of a school teacher and a carpenter. Raised in a modest home at the edge of town, Mira had always been soft-spoken, her eyes full of thought, her presence so gentle it often went unnoticed. She spent her days helping her father in his workshop, and her evenings curled up with her mother's worn books. Her world was simple, safe, and filled with small joys, until the day the Kavanagh family arrived. The Kavanaghs were everything Mira's family was not. Wealthy, powerful, and untouchable, they bought the biggest estate in town, installed their son, Rian, as head of the local development council, and began to change Silverpine piece by piece. Forest trails were bulldozed, hillsides reshaped, and long-standing businesses pushed out. But the most insidious thing they brought was charm. Ryan Kavanagh was magnetic, handsome, articulate, and manipulative beneath a polished smile. He began taking an interest in Mira, showing up at her father's shop, asking questions about woodwork he didn't care to understand. At first, Mira was flattered, then confused, then cautious. But by the time she realized what he was doing, it was too late. Ryan framed Mira's father in a land deed scandal. The papers were forged to show Mr. Elwood had sold their property to the council for a redevelopment project, an outright lie. Their home was demolished within weeks. Her father was arrested. Her mother fell into silence, and Mira's life cracked, open like glass beneath a stone. Rumors spread like wildfire that the Elwoods were frauds, thieves, liars. The townspeople who once smiled at Mira now crossed the street to avoid her. No lawyer would take their case. No reporter believed her. Ryan's reach was long, his connections tighter than chains, and when he approached her one last time, whispering, "You were never meant for this world, Mira," she knew he had done it not for gain, but for sport. With nothing left but her name and a ruined past, Mira vanished. She left Silverpine on foot with a backpack, some cash from a sympathetic grocer, and a vow etched deep in her soul: "One day I will return, and when I do, you will remember me." For 3 years, Mira drifted through cities and towns, learning to survive in shadows. She worked in bookstores, studied business in public libraries, and watched people, how they spoke, lied, sold, and climbed. She found mentors in unexpected places, an ex-corporate analyst who taught her how to navigate financial networks, a former PR expert who showed her how to shift public opinion, and a woman in a shelter who taught her the art of silence, of withholding truth until it could burn. Mira changed her name to Emery Wells, shed her softness like a skin, and became someone else, not just stronger, but untouchable. When she returned to Silverpine, it wasn't through the front gate. She came in with winter, under grey skies, in a black car with tinted windows. She wore no expression and carried no trace of the girl she once was. Her first step was to acquire the abandoned lot next to the Kavanagh estate, purchased quietly through a dummy company. Within weeks, rumors spread of a new investor in town, someone interested in restoring Silverpine's old town square. Ryan was curious. Emery Wells was introduced at a town gala, dressed in silver satin, eyes like still water. He didn't recognize her. Not fully. He flirted. She smiled. And the game began. Ryan Kavanagh had always loved control, the way people's eyes followed him, the way they listened when he spoke, even the way they laughed when he wanted them to. So when Emery Wells, this poised, elegant woman, entered the scene with her mysterious smile and subtle charm, he felt intrigued, yet unconsciously cautious. She wasn't like the others, She didn't laugh too loudly at his jokes. She didn't lean in when he talked. She didn't even seem to want anything from him. And that was precisely why she became his next fixation. Emery played the long game. She knew Ryan thrived on vanity and power, and she fed him just enough of both to keep him close. Her firm began bidding for reconstruction projects he wanted, and conveniently, she let him win, at first. She offered small favors, fake insights, even planted mistakes in reports. So he'd feel smarter. She crafted the illusion of inferiority, the subtle act of being someone just below his brilliance. And he believed it, just like he had once believed Mira Elwood would never stand up to him. But behind the scenes, Emery was building a web. She located the old land deeds Ryan had forged, many of which were now public records, thanks to a recent digitization initiative. She hired a private firm to trace the money trail that had funded the buyout of Mira's home and a dozen others. It all led to an offshore shell company owned by a front, an assistant of Ryan's, who had long since disappeared. Emery tracked her down in Thailand and wired her enough money to talk. What she got in return was golden. Documents, signed contracts, voice recordings, evidence that not only proved Ryan's role in the land theft, but exposed his manipulation of council votes, bribery, and a massive cover-up. Still, Emery didn't rush. Public exposure would only be the final blow. First, she wanted to erode his world from within, slowly, methodically. She began pulling investors from his projects, leaking tiny rumors about instability and conflict of interest. She sent anonymous tips to journalists in rival towns. Knowing it would stir whispers, she seduced one of his closest allies, not physically, but with power. With carefully planted truths and a few well-forged lies, she made him believe Ryan was about to betray him in a new land deal. The man walked out of $1 million deal overnight, leaving Ryan stunned. Then came the gala, the same annual event where Mira Elwood had last been seen in public, years ago, before her father's arrest and her family's collapse. Emery wore a crimson gown that night, her hair swept up, lips a deep, unreadable shade. Ryan was drunk on success and champagne, still unaware that his empire had begun to crack beneath him. He raised his glass to her as she approached, and for the first time, she leaned in close and whispered, "Do you ever think of Mira Elwood?" Ryan blinked. A flicker of recognition, buried deep, sparked behind his eyes. "What?" he said, confused. Emery smiled, eyes gleaming. "You should. She remembers you." She walked away, leaving him frozen, the glass trembling slightly in. His hand, that night, Ryan couldn't sleep. He scoured the internet for clues, pulling up every file he had long since buried. The more he looked, the more he noticed the subtle similarities, the voice, the eyes, the knowledge. Emery wasn't Emery at all. She was the ghost he had buried, the girl he thought would never rise again. And she wasn't just back. She was winning. By morning, Ryan's confidence had begun to splinter. His bank flagged an investigation. 2. Key contractors halted progress on his largest project. His name showed up in a regional blog, accusing him of corruption. None of it was explosive enough to destroy him outright, but that was the brilliance of it. It was a slow, deliberate dismantling, like watching your reflection in a mirror begin to crack, one small fracture at a time. Emery stood at the top of the hill that morning, just outside the Kavanaugh estate, sipping coffee from a paper cup as fog rolled in. The land he stole from her father had once held a swing, a garden, a home. Now it was paved over, soulless concrete wrapped around, a monument of greed, but not for long. She pulled out her phone and opened a file. The last piece of her plan, a video confession she had coaxed from the assistant who had helped Ryan forge the documents. It would go live soon, but not yet. First, she wanted to watch him sweat. She turned back toward town. She whispered quietly to the wind. Not yet, Ryan. You'll remember me fully. When you're on your knees. Ryan sat in his office, surrounded by silence, a kind he'd never noticed before. The once busy phones were still, the inbox that used to buzz with deals, and praise now bloated with delays, rejections, and veiled threats. His staff had grown, quieter in recent days. Their eyes shifted away when he entered the room. The same fear he had once inspired had now turned into something else, unease, suspicion, doubt, and he couldn't stop thinking about her. Emery Wells. No, Mira Elwood. It was impossible, yet undeniable. The way she watched him, the calm in her voice. She knew too much, moved too precisely, struck too cleanly. He remembered the way Mira had looked at him the day her father was dragged away, devastated, shattered. And now he saw that same look mirrored in Emery's stillness, not of pain, but of quiet vengeance. Ryan tried to regain control. He called, in favors, pushed reporters to shut down whispers of scandal, even hired an investigator to dig into Emery's past. But it was like chasing a shadow. Every record about her was clean. Every move she made looked legal. She had anticipated everything, sealed every crack. The very tactics he had once used to bury the Elwoods were now weaponized against him. The irony gnawed at his mind. He was losing ground, and he knew it. Meanwhile, Emery pressed forward with surgical precision. She met with a local historian who had adored her father and now ran a blog about Silverpine's transformation. She gave him exclusive access to documents, real ones, showing the forged deeds, the stolen land, the offshore accounts. He published an exposé in 4 parts, calling it The Cost of Silence. It spread quickly through town, gaining attention from regional news outlets and government watchdogs. Emery made no official comment. She didn't need to. The story told itself. Ryan's name began to fall. Quietly at first, whispers from donors, hesitation from bankers. But then loudly, publicly, the city council issued a formal audit of all Kavanaugh-affiliated projects. One by one, permits were revoked, contractors fled, and a judge reopened Mira Elwood's case. Her father, who had been quietly released a year after his sentence due to good behavior, was suddenly seen not as a disgraced man, but as a victim of corruption. And the people of Silverpine, they began to remember. Not all of them, but enough. Old neighbors came to the foundation site Emery had started on the outskirts of town, built on the very land Ryan had once stolen, and offered help. Tools, time, apologies. One evening, Emery visited her father's old workshop, now long abandoned, its windows cracked and roof sagging. She stood inside the frame of the place where she had learned patience, where her father once hummed while carving cedar. Her eyes swept across the dust, the cobwebs, and the faint outline of a child's, drawing still visible on the back wall. This was the soul Ryan tried to erase, but he had only buried it, and now it was rising. That night, she released the video, a clean 5-minute testimony from Ryan's former assistant, face blurred, voice altered, explaining the entire operation, how Ryan had orchestrated land theft, using fake bids and silent buyouts, how he manipulated votes and doctored paperwork, and how he'd laughed when Mira's family lost everything. The video ended with one simple line. He believed no one would ever challenge him. That's why he lost. The next morning, Emery watched the town erupt. Not in riots or chaos, but in truth. News vans arrived. Investigators swarmed the council building, Kavanaugh holding stock. What little of it remained in public trust plummeted. And Ryan? He didn't come into work. His home was silent. The man who had once stood like a king now sat in a house filled with echoes, blinds drawn, blindsided by the girl he thought he had destroyed. But Emery wasn't finished. She sent him one final message, a letter, handwritten, placed inside an envelope, identical to the one he'd sent her father when they'd been evicted. Inside she wrote, "Do you remember telling me I wasn't meant for this world? You were right. Mira Elwood wasn't, but I buried her." And from her silence, something far stronger was born. I didn't want revenge. I wanted truth. And now, the world sees you as you are. Not because I screamed, but because I didn't. She signed it. EW, and just like that, she ended it. Ryan Kavanaugh was no longer a man feared or envied. He had become a name whispered with disgust and disbelief. The man who once dictated the future of Silverpine now found himself trapped in a crumbling mansion, drowning in legal notices, phone calls from panicked investors, and unanswered emails from once loyal allies. His empire was imploding, but the worst part wasn't the loss of wealth or power. It was that he had no one left to blame but himself. Every time he tried to deny, to twist the narrative, the truth stood taller. The paper trail was airtight. The testimonies had surfaced. The eyes of Silverpine had turned toward him, not in awe, but in accusation. Outside the chaos, Emery remained still. She didn't attend press conferences. She didn't offer interviews. Her silence became a weapon, and the world around her filled in the blanks. People who had once dismissed Mira Elwood as a background figure now realized she had orchestrated a takedown so complete, so poetic, that even the harshest cynics called it justice. But Emery didn't want applause. She wanted her father's name cleared. She wanted her mother to smile without flinching when someone knocked at the door. And more than anything, she wanted to prove that you could rebuild a soul without becoming a monster. Her father, now quietly living in a small cottage a few miles from town, had watched everything unfold. He had read the articles, heard the stories, and seen his daughter stand tall, quiet, unwavering. When she finally came to visit, he didn't ask how she did it. He only opened the door, wrapped her in his arms, and said, "You came back whole." That was the only thing that mattered to him. But Emery knew she had one more step to take. Ryan had fallen, yes, but the people of Silverpine had suffered long before her family did. Entire neighborhoods were bulldozed, small businesses destroyed. The town had lost a piece of its soul in Ryan's pursuit of domination, so she gathered her team, her silent partners, legal minds, and community leaders, and proposed something unprecedented. Using the remaining funds from her acquired assets, she announced the launch of the Silverpine Renewal Project, a community-led initiative to rebuild what was lost. The land once taken through fraud would now be returned to the public through trusts and grants. Former shop owners were invited to reopen their businesses, rent-free for 1 year. A cultural centre would be built on the ashes of the torn-down library, and a scholarship fund in her father's name was established for students who had experienced displacement. The announcement stunned the town. Emery didn't just defeat Ryan. She revived Silverpine. In boardrooms and barbershops, people debated how she did it. Some called her a genius, others a ghost, but all agreed on one thing. Emery Wells had changed the course of their town forever. And then, one rainy evening, he came, Ryan, disheveled, eyes hollow, a man reduced to bones and regrets. He stood at the gates of the Renewal Project's construction site, staring at the sign that bore her name. Emery had just finished walking the grounds, clipboard in hand, when she saw him. Their eyes met across the storm-slicked gravel. No security stopped him. No words were needed. She walked toward him, calm and deliberate, like the rain couldn't touch her. "I have nothing left," he said quietly, his voice shaking more from defeat than the cold. "You've taken everything." Emery looked at him with no hatred, no glee, only a profound stillness. "I didn't take anything, Ryan. You gave it all away." He swallowed hard, looking down at his worn shoes. "Why didn't you finish me?" he asked. "You could have buried me completely. I deserve that." Emery stepped closer, close enough that the rain from his soaked coat began to drip between them. "You're right," she said. "You deserve far worse. But I didn't come back to destroy you. I came back to end the story you wrote about me." Ryan's shoulders slumped. His face, once filled with pride, now looked small and weathered. "I see you now," he whispered. "And I remember." Emery nodded slowly, then turned and walked away without another word. She didn't need him to crumble in front of her. She didn't need an apology. She had already won, years ago, when she chose to become more than the victim of his story. As she disappeared into the glow of the construction lights, Ryan remained in the rain, alone, forgotten, the architect of his own ruin. Weeks passed. The rains that had once soaked Silverpine dried, and with them, the last traces of Ryan Kavanagh's power were washed away. He was not jailed. His wealth bought him a suspended sentence and endless audits, but his reputation was unrecoverable. His name, once etched into every cornerstone of the town, had been stripped from buildings, removed from plaques, and erased from the lips of those who once followed him blindly. He disappeared into obscurity, exiled not by force, but by the unbearable weight of public shame and private guilt. And Emery, kept building. The Silverpine Renewal Project became more than construction. It became a movement. Families returned. Stores reopened. Elderly residents who had watched their community fall into silence now smiled at the sight of children playing in newly planted gardens. A statue was raised outside the cultural center. A simple bronze rose, blooming through cracked stone, its petals half open, facing the sky. There was no plaque, no signature, but everyone knew who it honored. Emery rarely attended ceremonies. She preferred to work in the background, signing documents, meeting quietly with educators, walking the site with her father on quiet mornings. Her mother, who had lived too long in the shadows of grief, now painted again, her fingers moving across canvas like they were rediscovering language. The house they built together on the edge of town was small but warm, its windows wide, its porch always lit with soft golden lamps. One evening, near the anniversary of the day her family lost everything, Emery found herself sitting beneath the old oak tree behind the community library, rebuilt exactly where it once stood. In her lap was a leather-bound journal. The pages inside held everything: sketches from her wandering years, plans drawn by candlelight, and letters she had written but never sent. One in particular had been rewritten a dozen times. It was addressed to Mira. She opened it now, pen in hand, and began writing the final words. "Dear Mira, you were never weak. They just couldn't see you. You spoke softly because the world was too loud, and you broke because you were made of love, not steel. But you didn't stay broken. I carried your silence like armor. I wore your pain like fire. I watched the world forget you, and I made sure they remembered. But now, you can rest. You were never meant to fight. That was my burden. And I think we're finally free." She closed the journal and held it to her chest. For the first time in years, her heart didn't feel heavy. It felt full, As the sun dipped behind the hill, casting long orange shadows over Silver Pine, a breeze swept through the town, rustling through open windows and echoing across rooftops. It passed over the statue of the blooming rose and the empty mansion where Ryan once ruled. It touched the workshop, now turned into a youth center, the bakery that reopened under its original owner, and the tiny garden Mira's mother had replanted behind their home. And in that breeze, there was no sound of war or vengeance, only peace, only healing, only the quiet strength of a woman who chose to rewrite her story, not with rage, but with resolve. Beneath her silence, there had always been power. Now the world would never forget